In this video, I'm going to go over how to build a dynamic yield curve. It'll show how the yield curve has changed incrementally over time. There are going to be 4 basic steps to doing this. Step 1 is going to be actually insert a spinner that will allow us to change the time frame. Step 2 will be to name a data range. Step 3 will be to use a horizontal lookup function to pull data off our named data range. And the 4th step will be to actually create the graph. So let's go ahead and get going on that. So the first step, we're going to insert our spinner. We're going to come up to our developer tab up top, come down to insert a form control, and then we can click anywhere on our Excel worksheet and we've inserted a spinner. We can click on that easily to resize it and move it. The next step we want to do, though, is to link it to a cell. We're going to link it to this cell B6. We want this to change as we increment up or down our spinner. Right-click on the spinner, format the control, link it to cell B6. We're going to go with our current value right now, which is 439. We don't have to set a current value. We're going to increment it by 1, and we can always set a minimum or maximum. Step 2, we're going to name this data range over here. This is where we're going to be wanting to look in our Excel worksheet to pull up our yield data. So we're going to highlight rows 2 all the way down through the very last month of our data set, which is January 19, and coming across. So highlight those rows. We're going to come over to our Formulas tab, Name Manager, and we're going to want to add a new name. We're going to simply name this Data. That way, in our horizontal lookup functions, rather than specifying particular columns and cell references, we can just specify the area called Data. And we're good to go. Let's go over next and actually use our horizontal lookup function. What we're going to want to do equals H lookup parenthesis, and I'm going to launch the function wizard just to make life a little easier to show here. What do we want to look up? In this column, we're going to want to look up the time to maturity. Where do we want to look it up? We want to look it up in the array called data. What do we want to look up? Well, we've already specified that we want to look up row 439, which is September 2005. I'm going to go back to that 1 second, and I want to anchor my reference to cell B6 because we want that to stay the same and be able to copy that across. Now I can simply copy that across, and I will have picked up the interest rate for 4 months, 1 year, or half year, 1 year, 2 years, and so on. But notice, when we copied it across, the format changed. So I'm going to highlight that, go home, percentage, and I'm going to add a couple decimal points. So these are the yield curve interest rates for September 2005. On our graph, we're also going to want to pick up the yield curve interest rates for 1 year prior to that. So we're going to use our lookup function once again, H lookup, and I'm going to invoke again that function wizard. What do we want to look up? We're going to want to look up this, and these basically also. Those are the column names up top here. Where do I want to look it up? I want to look it up in the table array called data. And instead of looking up row 439, I do want the 439. I'm going to anchor that, but I'm going to go back 12 months in time. And I'll hit OK. And I can copy that across. And I need to reformat this to percents and increase by a decimal point. Next step is to actually add my chart. To add the chart, I'm going to highlight the rows that include my headings and my data. I'm going to come up to the top, Insert, and I'm going to want to click this one for inserting a scatter graph, and I want dots on it. And there's my basic chart, and I can move that around and resize it as I see fit. I'm going to right-click on this center data area just to make it a little bit smaller, because I'm going to want to move my legend up and to the right. Click on that legend, drag it over. I'm going to resize it so they will stack on top of each other. Move it back over here just a little bit because I'm going to want to basically add my chart title and axis labels. So this was our dynamic treasury yield curve. I want to add an x-axis label and a y label. So coming over here to the Add Chart Elements, click on Chart Elements, Axis Title, Horizontal. This was the number of years until maturity. And on my vertical axis, I want the yield to maturity. So axis, add element, axis titles, vertical, yield to maturity. Enter. And I can reformat these if I want, highlight them, make them bold, increase the size of the font, do the same thing on the title. But there's my basic yield curve, and that yield curve will change over time with changes in interest rates.